Hello everybody, today I am driving an Abarth 595, my favourite. Those who've followed the channel for a while will know that the Abarth 595 is one of the few cars I have a real, genuine dislike for. I have reviewed a couple of the standard models and found much more about it that I don't like than that which I do. That's not to say that they are without positive traits. They are reasonably cheap to buy. They are very pretty cars. They sound very good too. They have a very dedicated, if slightly militant, owners community. There are lots of things you can do with them on the aftermarket to personalise them to your own taste and requirements. And there's loads of them, which for some people is a good thing. However, things I didn't like include the fact that the interiors are absolutely awful, acceptable perhaps for some of the entry-level Fiat 500s, but when you're spending more than double what they cost on an Abarth, you really do want it to feel a little bit nicer, and they rarely do. The driving position is impossibly high, with the car giving you this constant sense of it wanting to tip over, and the engine and gearbox are both hateful. The 5-speed box being shorter ratio really for 2021, not really very nice to use, and the engine in standard guise having the most awful of characteristics. No real punch low down, a very narrow power band, and a total unwillingness to rev or give you any power for its awkwardness. For my opinions on the Abarth, I was, generally speaking, crucified within the community. There were a few very entertaining comments in my last video, my favourites being those telling me that the reason I hated the car was because I drove the wrong one. Which to me sounds very much like somebody agreeing with me and saying, well, yes, obviously you hated that one. It's the awful one. Or people saying, well, yes, obviously you hated that one. It hasn't had £10,000 spent on it, modifying it, fixing some of its many problems. One person, though, willing to put their money where their mouth was Aaron, a young, dedicated petrolhead who actually runs a classic car business called Classic Car Solutions over in Hertfordshire, and they service and restore all sorts of things from 1910s Rovers up to pretty much the current day Nissan GT-R, which I suppose you could call a modern classic. What he's brought me today is his 2019 Abarth 595 Competizione. Now this is in the standard 595 range, usually the top dog. It sits a couple of levels above, but honestly, if you want an explanation of how the Abarth range works, don't go asking me. Ask Stefano from Steph AB TV. He's your man for all things Abarth related. He did help me prep a little bit for this review, so Steph, please correct me if I'm wrong, but the Competizione, up and above the regular cars, gets a larger Garrett turbo in place of the regular IHI one, meaning it develops more power, 180 horses in standard guise versus the sort of 140 odd of the lower cars. It will rev a little bit harder as well. You also get these Saybelt bucket seats, which, although they are still perched very high up, I have to say are quite nice. The exhaust is also changed out for a record Monza item. It looks a bit silly with its 4 tailpipes at the back. You should never have one tailpipe per cylinder unless you're a motorbike, but it does sound very nice. You also get Koni FSD dampers, which are a little higher quality and unfortunately a little stiffer than the regular items, and better brakes as well. This car, on top of that, has had a few changes made to it. The interiors had a nice upgrade in the form of this soft Alcantara piece on the dash, which has the 595 Competizione logo on it, because by default, what you'll actually have there is the 500 logo. Most of the rest of the interior, seats aside, is exactly the same as you kind of find it in more or less any 500 or 595. To say it's still this absolutely nasty, awful, crappy plastic. The heater controls here seem to be a little bit different from cars I've used before. They no longer feel like they are from a van from 2005. They now feel like they're from a van in 2011. Fiat Chrysler Group seem to really struggle with doing nice heater controls. The Alfa Romeo 4C was exactly the same. You know, £60,000 carbon tub car, 2 pence worth of heater controls out of an old van. This car's also got H&R lowering springs on it, so it's a little bit more hunkered down. It's got spacers on it too, 16mm on the rear, 8 on the front, which apparently is the thing to do. And it's had a bit of a power upgrade. It's got an AirTech intercooler. It has an Aura something or other. There's some other little goodies down there, a remap, and that's brought it up to a dyno-proven 230 horsepower, which in a car that is pretty small and reasonably lightweight, sub 1100 kilos, should make it fairly entertaining. But I've never really felt that any Abarth I've driven in the past has been entertaining. This word fun keeps coming back to me every time I drive one of these cars. People keep telling me, oh, it's fun, you don't get it, you don't understand, it's fun. If you have to tell me that it's fun, clearly I wasn't having fun in it. But this is allegedly a reasonably different car to standard, and for the first time ever I have managed to drive one of these on my own favourite test roads. So let's get the car into sport mode, which should sharpen up the throttle, weighten up the electric steering. It'll give the car a little bit more torque, and if I press the TTC button down here, the car will disable its traction control and use essentially a sort of E-differential, not actually a mechanical item, it's just going to be using the brakes. So I don't really know if that's the same as having traction off, but hey ho, I'm going to try it anyway because it's a really nice day out there, grip levels are good, and I want to give this car the absolute best chance of shining that I can. I am really, with this review, sort of damned if I do and damned if I don't. If I say that I love the car, everyone's going to come out and say that I'm either only saying that because everyone's told me that I'm wrong, or that I was wrong the whole time. Or if I say that I don't like the car, people are going to tell me that I've made up my mind already and I was never ever going to like it. Those that have watched the channel for a long time will hopefully understand that I am always honest about a product, and if you've watched any of my recent Porsche reviews, you'll know that I have absolutely no qualms whatsoever about going against the grain. So, let's stop beating about the bush, shall we? Let's see what she can do. This is without a doubt one of the oddest sensations I've ever had in a car. I will be upfront and I'll say that this certainly does have some improvements over the previous cars that I've driven. Those dampers, the lowering springs and the spacers have given it just that little bit more sense of connection to the road. I'm slightly less concerned about this simply toppling over than I have been in other versions, and that's a very, very good thing. It means that I'm less afraid to press on. And indeed, you certainly can press on and make really rather ridiculous progress in this car. It does remain, though, a very deeply flawed machine. The thing that's oddest about it right now is the noise it makes. I don't know how much this translates, but when you press the right pedal, the noise that comes out of it or makes its way into the cabin sounds very much like I'm not sure if it's either an evil death ray or a slightly broken vacuum cleaner. Very high-pitched noise. Sounds like the machines from the War of the Worlds decimating something. Listen. Bizarre. Absolutely bizarre. It's still a certainly firm ride, although I wouldn't call it unresolved. You can tell that the conies are just a little bit better quality than the regular items. The car does feel a little bit more in tune with the road. The steering is still not brilliant, although I'll give it credit and say that I do have a vague sense of what the chassis is actually doing. I recently drove a BMW 230i, and by comparison, the Abarth gives me a far better idea what exactly it's planning for me. There is still a deadness around the sort of 12 o'clock, and perhaps that's engineered in to try and keep the thing going straight when you're under acceleration. The brakes are decent too, they're uprated stoppers, not sure exactly what kind. It's a corner like this that does show the weakness in the steering. Like I said, you start with a dead spot, then it does begin to weight up, and then once you're in the corner and you want to make those small little adjustments, which this kind of car should be really happy to do, it just doesn't want to talk to you at all. You feel like you make big movements and nothing really changes. If you are accelerating when you hit a camber change too, be ready for it, because the car is going to just drag you right across it. The car does certainly suffer from a reasonable amount of torque steer. It's not terrible, I've had worse for sure. The fact that this car is very compact certainly helps it. It means when it does start moving around a little bit, you aren't so worried, because you do have genuine space either side of you for the car to shuffle around and do its thing. You can heel and tow, or certainly rev match anyway, but I feel in sport mode the throttle has been made just overly sensitive. You put your foot down just the slightest amount and it really does want to give you everything it's got. That's a shame. These seats I really do like, yet still far too high. I mean, I feel like I'm sat about, well, probably 2 or 3 inches at least higher than I'd really want to be in this thing. Problem is, if I then sat where I think I should be sat, you probably couldn't really see the road at all. So I understand there's a compromise, and because the base of this thing is a city car, that's actually exactly where you want to be sat. Very difficult to get this right. Second gear, it's very dry out there. It's not actually too cold today, and she really squirrels around. Certainly gets her move on though. This is quick. There's a very similar sensation to that Civic FK2 that I drove. I feel more passenger than pilot. The steering is nicely weighted actually, but I just don't feel like it requires my involvement. I feel like I'm sat in one of those, amusement arcade chairs, except this one has a force feedback wheel, and you're not actually controlling it, you're just holding on and being dragged around for fun. But, and this is big, you've got to understand how big this is for me, I think I am actually having fun right now. I am. I'm enjoying this car. Look, a smile. It works well on this road. The more demanding pieces of tarmac do challenge it, but it's a challenge the car is willing to take on, and it does a reasonably admirable job. I've got no time or love whatsoever for the constant silly turbo noises, that's just irksome. But as a young person wanting something small and entertaining, this is great. Its owner Aaron will soon be selling it, and he's replacing it with a GR Yaris. I know a lot of people will think that surely is going to be basically the same thing but more expensive. Trust me, the GR Yaris exists in a whole different league. It's far faster than this. I would say a lot more exciting. You're much more in control of the whole thing, and it's also way better made. The gearbox in here is a frustration, because what would make this a much more enjoyable experience would be to have a real nice, slick, sweet shifting box. The engine's a definite improvement for sure, because you can tell it's got a much broader range of power and torque, so the gearbox being a bit rubbish is far less of an issue. But if it was nicer, you'd just enjoy this car a lot more, or I certainly would. And that really is the sort of thing I think this car should be all about. It's Italian after all, they're always imperfect creations, but there's certain things they get absolutely bang on. And for something like this, I'd want all the mechanical side of it to be really exciting, if a little bit sketchy in places, but the gearbox is just such an important part of this car, and it's just not up to scratch. Shame that. Steph, I'm sure, will be able to tell me if there's a way of improving that. Get in the comments below, mate. Tell me what's going on here. There's a little bump there. I never knew there was a bump there, but this car found it for sure. There are improvements in here versus the older cars. You've got a slightly better sat-nav, which is TomTom powered, and that's a very nice thing to have. Poor old TomTom, I mean, who buys a TomTom on its own anymore? Who buys a Garmin or whatever? 10 years ago, everyone I knew had a TomTom. It was a great thing to have. Well, I got mine stolen in Hackney Wick, but that's a story for another time. But then Google Maps came along, and I'm surprised TomTom are even still in business. The display down here is all right enough, and if you pop out of sport mode, it will give you a slightly different look where it prioritises your trip information and all that jazz. This car's been averaging 38 to the gallon, including that jaunt, and on a general run it will do sort of in the vicinity of 40. So for the extra performance, you don't really seem to have sacrificed much in terms of economy. And I must confess that whenever I see one of these parked up, especially one in the right colour combination, this is rally yellow. You used to be able to get them in the exact Ferrari yellow, Giallo Modena, but they changed for whatever reason, and this apparently is a slightly deeper shade, but still looks great, suits the car down to a T. And when they are presented well, they are still great looking cars. They are, I'll confess that. I've never said otherwise. And as something to just have on the driveway as a young person, or if you've got, you know, a young person in the family or whatever, I get it. I totally get it. It's a good shopping car, and you can occasionally have a little bit of fun with it. But I would definitely tire of it after not that long, I think. I'm not entirely sure that Abarth are really covering themselves in any form of glory with the ridiculous versions of the car that they're coming out with. I mean, the Yamaha version, like, did Yamaha build any of this car? I'm not so sure. Maybe they did, someone tell me. And most disappointingly, the new 695 to me doesn't really seem to be much of a 695 at all. The old Biposto, that was quite a wild thing, and I'm sure, again, a very special car in its own way. Also, you are then spending sort of 30 grand, I think they were when they were new, and you still get stuffed with the same awful, horrid interior, more or less. This probably is the sweet spot in the range. You could pick one of these up new for less than £20,000 if you're willing to haggle or find something in stock, and that to me is reasonable value for money. As an all-rounder, the Ford Fiesta ST is a better car, but in truth it exists in a different class. I haven't really spent much time with any of the newer sporty minis to see how they compare, but again, they're a lot of money now, so I'm not sure they're really a great comparison either. But the mission for today was for me to see whether I could find some enjoyment in a different version of the Abarth 595, because previously I have found absolutely none. And I am very happy to say that it has been mission successful. I stand by everything that I have said previously about the other cars that I've driven, and I will stand by everything I say about this one, because I do believe it is possible for both things to be true. Some of them are rubbish. This one is definitely a lot less rubbish, and if you have to have a 595, this is the one to go for. A huge thank you to Aaron for letting me loose in his lovely little 595 Abarth. Cheers to you stopping by and watching. Please like, comment below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you all for the next one. Bye bye.